No one ever walked into the mathematics lecture hall at 2 a.m. at Crestmont University, where complex equations had been scribbled in white chalk on blackboards for centuries. Night was the only thing that filled the space after business hours. Yet that night, a sliver of light leaked unexpectedly through the crack of a large lecture hall's door, not from a maintenance bulb, but from a small fluorescent lamp, casting a glow across a maze of mathematical symbols on the board. Professor Nathaniel Grant, the head of the mathematics department, was not habitually returning to campus at night. But that evening, he had forgotten some documents for an international conference the next day. He walked into the deserted corridor. The only sound echoing was the click of his shoes against the marble floor. As he neared room C202, he frowned. Lights, that hall was supposed to be locked. The door wasn't locked. A cold glow spilled out. He pushed gently. The blackboard before him was filled with non-linear complex equation problems he had once presented to his graduate class, and no one had ever solved them. Standing before the board was a young girl, around 14 years old. Dark skin, curly hair tied back hastily. A worn, oversized jacket seemed to swallow her slender frame. She had no idea someone was behind her. Her left hand held chalk and her right hand was writing. Her eyes were glued to the board. Her lips moved in murmurs. Her reasoning was fluid, each step clear and precise, as if the formulas whispered answers into her ear. He stood frozen, not because she was there, but because of how she was there. No fear, no hesitation. Only a complete and total focus, as if the world around her had ceased to exist. "What are you doing here?" His voice rang out, dry cold, like the stone wall behind him. The girl turned. The chalk slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Her eyes widened, then quickly dimmed with resignation. This wasn't the first time she'd been caught. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean." "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The girl took a breath. "My name is Amara. My father and my uncle Malik work on the night cleaning crew. I usually wait in the staff lounge. But tonight, this problem..." He looked more closely at her. Dark brown skin, torn shoes at the heel, eyes so intelligent they were impossible to ignore. "You understand this problem?" he asked, pointing at the board, doubt mingled with curiosity in his voice. Amara swallowed, her voice small but firm. "It's a nonlinear optimization problem. I was trying to transform it using an improved Lagrangian method, but applying a logarithmic transformation first makes the system more manageable." For a moment, the room went completely still. Time seemed to stop, leaving only the clarity of the girl's words echoing louder than any lecture he had ever given. In over 30 years of teaching, Nathaniel Grant had never encountered a student, let alone a child, who could say such things without their hand trembling. Amara left the lecture hall with her worn-out backpack clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes still lingering on the unfinished equations behind her. Professor Grant said just one sentence before turning away, carrying the documents he had come for in the first place tomorrow. Same time. "Come back." She didn't dare ask why. She dared not ask, "Why didn't you kick me out?" At dawn the next morning, in a tiny one-room apartment in South Ridge, where the sound of passing trains through the window was more familiar than birdsong, her father, Uncle Malik, was brewing coffee in a dented kettle. "You didn't sleep, Amara?" he asked, noticing her distant gaze over the modest breakfast tray. "I'm just a little tired." She avoided his eyes, trying to hide the storm of emotion building inside. Amara Johnson was a loving, devoted father. But after years of scrubbing the elegant buildings of Crestmont University, he no longer dreamed. He believed in labor, in reality, and he had reminded his daughter hundreds of times, "Don't let anyone see you there. They don't want us to exist in their world." This time she had broken that rule. Amara felt like she didn't belong at Emerson High School all day. While her math teacher, Ms. Ramirez, was writing a quadratic equation on the board, Amara's mind was busy picturing how to simplify a non-linear matrix problem she hadn't solved the night before. Amara, the teacher's voice called out, "Would you like to solve this one for us?" Amara looked up, frowning slightly because it was too easy. She quietly wrote a brief solution, then returned to her seat. A few classmates giggled. Know-it-all, weirdo. Those words no longer hurt her. What gnawed at her was the feeling of being trapped in a cage of mediocrity, while her mind longed for deeper layers of mathematics' real challenges. After class, Ms. Ramirez asked her to stay behind. "You seem distracted today," she said, her tone gentler than the words themselves. Amara hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I met a professor last night. He saw the problem I was working on and asked me to come back." Ms. Ramirez didn't ask much. She had watched Amara solve problems at a college level since 7th grade. "You deserve problems that deserve you," she said softly. But what if he was just curious and left Amara asked? What if he just wants to test me like an experiment and then forget? The teacher sat beside her. "People will always doubt you, Amara, especially when talent comes from places they don't expect. But don't let anyone, even yourself, make you believe you're not worthy." That sentence stayed with her all evening. That night, as she and her father walked once again through the back entrance of the lecture hall building, Amara spoke up. "I need to tell you something." Malik stopped in the hallway. "Dad, I talked to a professor. He didn't punish me. He asked me to come back." In the darkness, Malik turned around. His face was filled with both anger and fear. "You did what, Amara? That's my workplace. You could get me fired. I was just doing math. I didn't damage anything." "You did math in a place that's not yours, on a board that's not yours in a school I'm only allowed to clean," he nearly shouted. "We don't belong there, baby. I go there to earn a living, not for you to chase dreams." But this time Amara didn't lower her head, like she usually did. Her voice was small, but unyielding. "But I belong to mathematics. And math doesn't choose people based on social class, does it, Dad?" The two stood silently in the dark hallway. A breeze swept in through a slightly cracked window, lifting a loose page from the notebook in Amara's backpack, the one with the first solution she ever wrote on her own. The janitor's lounge on the ground floor of the mathematics building was never designed for studying. The ceiling was low, and the flickering fluorescent light was barely steady. 3 walls were lined with shelves of mops, cleaning chemicals, and dirty towels. At the center was a small crooked table where Amara placed her old backpack and a notebook stuffed with tiny handwritten formulas. The following night she came back. Her father said nothing, only gave her a nod and went to work. The door closed behind her. Amara sat down, opened her papers, and began. Around 2 in the morning, the door swung open. Professor Nathaniel Grant entered without greeting, without expression. In his hand was a grey folder. He set it on the table and pushed it toward her. Inside were 5 problems. Each one spanned more than a page, all handwritten so complex that they could disrupt an entire graduate seminar. "Do as many as you can," he said. "Don't rush, just get them right." Amara nodded. She didn't ask why her, or what is this test for. There was only one thing clear in her mind. Mathematics was the only language that didn't care about class or status. In the nights that followed, a rhythm began repeating like a secret ritual. Her father silently pushed a cleaning cart down the hallway. Amara hunched over the table, pale blue ink pen in hand, fingers smudged with graphite. Grant appeared near 2 a.m., handed her new problems, took the old ones, never said well done, only said, The next one's on Riemannian geometry. She didn't need praise, she needed problems. And he thought, never admitting it, began to anticipate each of her solutions like a collector waiting for an undiscovered melody. On Thursday night, the door burst open. But this time, Grant wasn't alone. Behind him was an older man with salt and pepper hair, a grey suit and eyes that scanned the room like he was examining a specimen in a lab. "So this is the girl," the man said, cold and haughty. "The walking calculator you mentioned." Amara jumped to her feet. Grant's brow furrowed slightly. "Amara, this is Professor Carl Benson, head of the Number Theory Division, one of the strongest opponents of the initiative I've been pursuing." Benson needed no further explanation. He snatched the papers Amara was working on, flipping through them like supermarket receipts. After a few seconds, he let out a dry laugh. "Interesting, but unpolished. This knowledge lacks depth. It's instinct, not training." Amara froze. "And we're gambling the university's budget on a fragment of talent that's not even refined." Benson turned to Grant. "This isn't serious." Grant didn't reply. He waited until Benson left the room, then finally spoke. "Don't let him make you doubt yourself. Some scholars can't tell the difference between excellence and privilege." It was the first time Amara saw any sign of emotion from him. Not pity, but quiet empathy. Amara didn't know it yet, but in that moment she had become part of something far larger than herself. Grant had been working to pass a complete scholarship program for students from underserved communities, a dream blocked for years by men like Benson. Amara, without even knowing, was living proof of what Grant had long hoped to show the world: genius doesn't come with a resume. It comes with questions and patience. That night the janitor's lounge was oddly silent. Not because Amara was tired, but because Professor Grant didn't bring any problems with him. Instead, he placed a thick brochure on the table bearing the Crestmont University logo and a bold title, Annual Conference of the Committee on Diversity and Opportunity. "Tomorrow," he said, "the committee will vote on the new scholarship program I've fought for over the past 7 years, the Bridges Initiative." Amara looked up, uncertain. "And you want me to be there?" Grant didn't answer immediately. He sat down on the plastic chair across from her, for the first time not as a professor, but as a man holding a scalpel while being the patient himself. "Amara, do you know why I've been bringing problems here every night? Because you wanted to challenge me, no?" he said softly. "I was looking for evidence." Silence stretched like a slow cut. Amara leaned forward slightly. "You're using me as proof in the meeting, not using." "I'm acknowledging you," he corrected. "Crestmont and many other universities are wasting talent simply because they're not looking in the right places. They don't believe a child in a janitor's lounge can solve problems beyond graduate level. I need to show them they're wrong." Amara bit her lip. She knew he wasn't lying, but the truth still stung. She was an example, a walking statistic, a moving story they could nod at, then forget. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "You just need to be present. Stand there. Solve a problem, maybe. Or not. But your existence in that room is already a question they can't ignore." Just then the door opened. Her father Malik stood in the doorway. He had heard everything. He stepped in his face, not angry but deeply troubled. "No." His voice was as solid as stone. "My daughter is not a performance for people in white suits pretending to be enlightened." "She's not a performance," Grant replied calmly. "She's the answer to a question this system has avoided for a century." Malik stepped forward and placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Amara, you don't understand. These people, they don't see you. They only see what you represent: a skin color, a social class, a rare statistic that makes them look progressive." Amara wanted to protest, but her father's eyes were filled with fear. Not fear of Grant, fear of losing her to a place that had treated him like a shadow. She looked at Grant, then back at her father, then down at her ink-stained fingers from last night's problem set. Silence, and after a long moment she said just one sentence, "If I don't belong to that world, then I'll go to change it." That morning, Maxwell Hall at Crestmont University didn't resemble any classroom Amara had ever known. Long wooden benches, electronic boards and cameras are set up in every corner of the room. The attendees were dressed in crisp suits, speaking in a language that wasn't meant for dialogue, but for asserting dominance. Amara sat at the back of the room near the emergency exit. Her old jacket had been replaced by a light grey cardigan borrowed from Ms. Ramirez. Next to her was her father, arms crossed, eyes sharp, as if ready to shield her from the entire world. Upon the stage, Professor Grant stepped to the microphone. Esteemed committee members, he began, his voice not loud but steady and clear. Today we are voting on the Bridges Initiative, a program to identify and support talent from underrepresented communities. Proposed annual budget $2.3 million. The murmurs began. Some committee members nodded. Others smacked their lips in mild disapproval, and then, just as if on cue, came a long, drawn-out humph. Professor Carl Benson stood up with his hands resting on his belly, eyes peering through glasses. "We cannot commit this kind of funding just for a few emotional anecdotes. Ladies and gentlemen, higher education is not a social experiment. We need data, not math problems from a janitor's girl that Grant is parading around." The phrase janitor's girl hit Amara like a slap. Her eyes blurred, her father's grip tightened on the armrest. The hall fell silent. On stage, Grant didn't react. He flipped a page and said, "The girl Professor Benson just referred to as a janitor is the one who solved the Bernoulli-Euler equation that he declared unsolvable without a PhD at last month's conference." A slide appeared on the screen, a scan of Amara's solution, delicate handwriting, precise layout, and the answer that was not only correct but inventive. No one spoke. This isn't about sentiment. This is competence and exposes a serious flaw in assessing human potential. Professor Benson flushed red. Surely just a rare case, an outlier. It proves nothing. And right then Amara stood. "Excuse me," she said, trembling. I'm not an outlier." All eyes turned to her. Amara strolled to the front, each step a battle inside her. "I'm a 14-year-old girl. I love math. I don't have a tutor. I don't have a study room. I study in a lounge that smells like bleach. And I'm not the only one." The entire room froze. "I have 5 friends at Emerson Public School. They're just as smart as I am, but don't have books. They don't have someone who believes in them. They could be sitting here too if a program like this existed." Benson opened his mouth to respond, but an elderly professor seated at the front stood first. "Young lady, problem number 4 on the slide. The logarithmic transformation, how did you approach it?" Amara turned, picked up a marker and stepped to the whiteboard. Her hand began to draw graphs and write lines of reasoning. Not a single mistake, not a comma out of place. No one in the room said a word, not even those who had believed she didn't belong. When Amara wrote the final line of her solution, the elderly professor applauded. Others followed. Grant said nothing. He stood quietly, eyes glowing with a light unseen until now. He stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, that is one mind. One person we almost lost. The question is, how many more are left behind just because they weren't born into the places we expect?" The vote was announced 30 minutes later. 14 in favor, 3 opposed. The Bridges Initiative, approved. Amara's father squeezed her hand in silence. He didn't apologize. He didn't say I was wrong. but his eyes brimming with pride were an answer louder than any words. Outside Maxwell Hall, the sky had just begun to lighten. The early spring wind swept across the stone courtyard, carrying with it the echoes of a vote that had never happened before in Crestmont's history. Inside, Amara Johnson sat motionless in her chair, hands still trembling. Everything had happened too fast to feel real. She hadn't expected to stand, hadn't expected to solve a problem in front of a room full of adults. But she had, and now the world was beginning to shift. 1 week later, in his third-floor office in the mathematics department, Professor Grant sat by the window, sunlight illuminating the file before him, Bridges Initiative. First month report. The numbers were precise. 47 students from underprivileged communities had been admitted in the first phase. All tested at or above the Crestmont Honors average. 7 of them were from Amara's district. Grant smiled, a small smile, not one of pride, but a man's smile when he's finally allowed to exhale after holding a secret for too long. His assistant walked in. "Professor, have you heard about Benson?" Grant looked up, his gaze calm. He resigned last week. Columbia had extended an offer, but withdrew it after a recording leaked of him calling the students in the program charity experiments. Grant nodded gently. He crafted his fate. That afternoon, the first Bridges cohort gathered in the student dining hall for an informal meeting. No one arrived in private cars, no one carried a famous last name, but the room buzzed like a birth ceremony. Every table was alive. One group was discussing nonlinear calculus. Another was rewriting a probability algorithm for a video game. Amara was sitting in the corner, explaining non-Euclidean geometry to 3 first-year students, her eyes bright as if she'd never lost a night of sleep. When she saw Grant walk in, she nodded. There was no need for pleasantries anymore. They both understood their roles in this larger story. "You know," she said as they stood by the window, "all 5 students from my Emerson school got into the next round." "You found them," Grant replied. "We used to study together. One loves physics. One is better at logic than I am. But I was the only one whose dad worked at a university. I got a glimpse inside." He didn't respond right away. Then suddenly she asked, "Professor, my dad doesn't clean at night anymore, right?" Grant nodded. "Mr. Malik is now the logistics coordinator for the Bridges Initiative. He knows every hallway, every basement of this school better than any administrator." Amara said nothing, but in her eyes something closed and something else opened. No one expected that a 2 a.m. encounter, which could have been dismissed as a rules violation, would become the seed of an educational revolution. But for those who witnessed it, one truth became undeniable. Change didn't come from meetings or budgets. It began with a girl, a piece of chalk, and a blackboard in a room that wasn't made for her. The rigid and closed system had no choice but to open its first door, simply because it could not explain why a girl like Amara existed. Monday morning at Emerson High School looked no different than any other day. The hallways echoed with bells, classrooms opened with dim lighting, and whiteboards displayed the same fundamental math problems. But for a few students, just a few, something felt different. They had started hearing rumors. A girl named Amara Johnson, who once studied here and had solved math problems at night at Harvard, was coming back to find them. Amara didn't return to her old school with badges or reputation. She brought a small backpack and a set of math problems she had written herself, not to test anyone, but to ask a question. "Have you ever solved something so bold that others told you it was just a dream?" She sat in on Ms. Ramirez's class. Same old classroom, same board, same broken-legged chair, propped up with cardboard. But when a few students noticed her, their eyes lit up as if realizing the one who used to sit here is now reaching back to pull us forward. 2 weeks later, Amara handed Grant a handwritten list of 5 students from Emerson. She introduced each one as if writing letters of recommendation. Jaden, passionate about astrophysics, once built a telescope out of old PVC pipes. Lena is a statistics whiz who can analyze social media data to predict trends. Carlos, a logic enthusiast who solved expert-level Sudoku using abstract reasoning. Nia designed a video game using only an Android phone. Tamir secretly visited the public library every night to learn linear algebra on YouTube. "We don't lack geniuses," she said. "We just lack people willing to believe that genius can come from anywhere." Grant turned the pages in silence. "Do you think this is your mission?" Amara shrugged, but her eyes didn't waver. "I used to think the world wasn't built for me. Now I understand I'm here to help change it." On Friday evening in the Bridges Program Lounge, a group of new students debated Galois theory. Amara sat at the end of the table, hands wrapped around a cup of hot cocoa, quietly observing. No one called her a prodigy. She didn't need that. She was the guide showing that brilliance doesn't always wear a white shirt and live in a home lined with bookshelves. Sometimes genius wears torn shoes, takes notes with cheap ballpoint pens, and once hides in a janitor's lounge to study. One afternoon in the courtyard at Crestmont, she spotted her father Malik giving directions to a group of incoming freshmen. No longer pushing a cleaning cart, he now served as the official logistics coordinator for the program with a title and a printed business card. She walked up to him. "You know, Dad, she said you belong here more than anyone. You know every corner of this place." Malik smiled faintly. "I'm used to it. But yeah, walking these halls now it feels different," she nodded, "because we're not sneaking around anymore." They stood in quiet for a while. "You've changed a lot, Amara," he said. "I don't think so," she replied. "I just grew up when the system started listening. No one ever sees the moment the world changes. It doesn't happen with bells or fireworks. It begins when a girl once labeled an outsider returns to her community not to leave it behind, but to bring it." Garnet Hall in New Haven was packed. Representatives from 12 of the most prestigious universities across the US were in attendance. Some were deans, some educational investors, some former skeptics of initiatives like Bridges. And at the center of the stage stood Amara Johnson, now 15, wearing a simple navy blazer, her hair tied back, holding a microphone like the chalk she used to grip in dim janitor's rooms. She stepped forward. The spotlight hit. No teleprompter, no cue cards. Only her and what she believed. "I used to think places like Crestmont weren't meant for people like me," she began, her voice clear, steady. "And for many years that was true. I came from a one-room apartment in South Ridge. My kind and hard-working father used to push a mop cart through Crestmont's hallways silently. I studied in a lounge that smelled like bleach, using a blackboard that wasn't mine, writing with chalk that was never given to me. The audience didn't blink. I used to think genius belonged to the wealthy, to those with letters of recommendation, private schools, and advanced textbooks. But then I realized that genius doesn't know your address. It doesn't care what uniform you wear. Genius needs to be seen." Murmurs, nods, a few misty eyes. In that forgotten room, I solved problems from which graduate students walked away. But what I needed most wasn't praise. I needed someone to believe I had the right to exist. Her voice hardened. Her eyes swept the entire hall. "And I am not the only one. I'm just the lucky one who got discovered. There are hundreds, thousands like me being left behind, not because they lack ability, but because this system wasn't built to recognize them." In the front row, her father Malik sat beside Ms. Ramirez. Both sat in silence. And that's why Bridges is not a charity program. It's a debt, a correction, a way to stop evaluating human worth based on zip code, parental income, skin tone, or accent. Genius is not a privilege. It's perseverance in the dark. It's solving equations under a maintenance light. It's taking notes on misprinted paper. It's turning a forgotten room into your classroom. She took a deep breath. And if you want change, don't ask me how I did it. Ask instead, why did a system like this leave me to do it alone for so long? When Amara finished, the entire auditorium rose to their feet. No cue, no prompt. They stood because they had just heard something undeniable, truth. In the back corner, a group of Ivy League program directors whispered to one another. Bridges would be replicated. Journalists, cameras, podcasts, and social media began documenting a story that would no longer be labeled inspiring, but would become a part of America's educational transformation. At the end of the session, as people exited the hall, Grant caught up to Amara and her father outside. "Malik," he said, "when I first met Amara, you thought I was testing a theory, didn't you?" Malik nodded. "I thought you just wanted a feel-good example, a poor kid doing something extraordinary to feel enlightened." Grant smiled gently. "That wasn't it. Back then I was looking for a reason to believe that change was possible, and I found it." 1 year later, the hallways at Crestmont looked different. Once quiet walls were now filled with Bridges announcements, student-run workshops, and public school outreach sessions led by Amara herself. Bridges were no longer an idea, it was reality. And in every speech on achievement, every data point on student success, every statistic about formerly overlooked youth, one small name kept appearing: Amara Johnson. The girl once told, "You don't belong here." Now the reason the door was never locked again.